Good morning, grade 3. Today we're going to keep looking at God's amazing creation, plants and soils. And today we are especially going to look at how do plants interact with their surroundings and how do they reproduce? How does pollination work? So we're going to start by reading from the textbook. So you can pause the video for a minute while you go grab your textbook and turn to page 70. We're just doing a very little bit of reading today. Page 70. How do plants interact with their surroundings? What happens to the grass under a large tree? If the grass can't get enough sunlight, it will die. The ground under the tree may be bare, but if the soil is moist, moss may grow there. If you cut down the tree and get rid of the shade, the moss may die. Grass may start growing there again. Changing the amount of sunlight can change the plants that grow in an area. Think about the other things that plants need. How can changing the surroundings in other ways change the type of plants that grow in an area? What might happen to the plants in a deciduous forest if the temperatures got hotter? What might happen to the plants in a rainforest if it started raining less? What might happen to the plants in a grassland if the soil became polluted? Changing the surroundings can change the type of plants that grow in an area. Sunlight, temperature, water, soil, and minerals are all part of a plant's surroundings. It's easy to see how a plant's surroundings affect the plant, but plants affect their surroundings too. Then on the next page, the little green rectangle. Try this. Observe water from plant leaves. This would be a neat experiment for you to try. You just need to take some Ziploc bags and one of your plants in the house. It says trees give off water through their leaves. This water in the air forms rain and causes changes in an area's climate. Can you see the water coming from plant leaves? Try this activity to find out. Carefully place 2 small plastic bags over several leaves of a houseplant. Place only 1 bag over each leaf. Use a twist tie to close the bag around the stem of a plant, or if it's a Ziploc bag, you can just zip it closed as far as you can. Observe what happens inside the bags over the next couple of days, and I think you will see water droplets starting to collect on the inside of the plastic bag. Next page, by the lions. When tall plants such as trees grow, they provide shade and cool the land. Think about a very hot day. You will be much cooler taking a walk through a forest than you would taking a walk on a concrete road. How do you think this shade helps some of God's other creatures? Plants give off water into the air through their leaves. This water becomes part of the water cycle. Some of it becomes rain. A large tree such as a maple or oak can put more than 1,000 liters of water into the air in just one day. About half of all the rain in a rainforest comes from the water given off by plants. So I'll bet you never realized that before, but the plants are not only giving off oxygen for us to breathe in, they're also giving off water, which then is in the air and it condenses and it joins with all the other water in the air and creates clouds and rain. Plants also affect their surroundings in other ways. Plant roots anchor the soil and keep it from eroding. Plants give off oxygen during photosynthesis. People and animals need this oxygen to breathe. Plants also take in carbon dioxide. This keeps too much carbon dioxide from building up in the air. Too much carbon dioxide would trap heat from the sun and make it hotter outside. Can you see how plants are a big part of God's plan to take care of the rest of His creation? They're pretty amazing things. Now let's take a look at some of these slides about God's amazing creation. So, a plant's leaves function much like small solar panels. Their job is to absorb sunlight and to help turn light into energy and food for the plant. We talked about that in the last lesson, how they do photosynthesis to create food. The shape, surface area, and angle of a leaf can determine how much light it absorbs. The larger and flatter the leaf's shape, the more sunlight it can collect. Sharp angles in leaves reduce the amount of light it intercepts. As the sun gets hotter at midday, the leaves of some plants turn or close slightly to reduce the amount of sunlight they absorb. Each plant has just the right leaf for its environment. Needle-shaped leaves, like those found on pine and spruce trees, have less surface area, which causes them to absorb less light. Some desert plants, like the aloe plant, have tall, narrow leaves with thick skins that absorb less sunlight and help prevent water loss. And here we have a number of different pictures of leaves, different types of leaves, and you can see how some of them are flat and large, and so they're going to collect a lot more sunlight than the ones that are pointy. Here at the bottom we have some pine needles. They're not going to collect as much sunlight. So every branch is different. Here at the top we have a part of a cactus. So the cactus, of course, tends to grow in the desert where it's very hot and very sunny. So if they were collecting all this sunlight all the time, they would have way too much heat and energy collected. So they don't need to collect quite as much energy from the sun. So they can have longer and narrower leaves, which will collect less energy. And these also are very thick. They have a very thick skin, and that helps to have less water evaporating into the air. Here we have some more pine needles, and of course our famous maple leaves at the bottom. They collect lots of nice sunlight, and that gets converted into glucose, which is the kind of sugar which we then collect in the sap in the spring and can turn into maple syrup. Now here's a short, well, not so short video about pollination.
Hi, my name is Dr. Mia Park. Have you thanked a bee today? If you haven't, you really should, because bees and other pollinators are responsible for much of the food we eat. Did you know that 90% of flowering plants rely to some degree on animal pollinators? Or that many of our favorite foods need pollinators to produce? I'm a pollination ecologist, a scientist that studies the relationships between plants and their animal pollinators. So what is pollination, and why do plants need the help of animals? Well, I bet you didn't realize, but pollination is simply plant sex. Pollination is the movement of pollen from the male parts of the flower to the female parts of the flower. Only after pollination can the pollen then fertilize the eggs in the female flower, which results in seeds and future plants. But plants have a problem. Unlike animals, they're firmly rooted to the ground, so they can't just get up and find a mate. The earliest plants, like ferns, relied on water to move their pollen from plant to plant. Other plants, like conifers and grasses, make an enormous amount of pollen that they release into the wind, and this is called wind pollination. And it's sort of like a lottery, where you spew out as much pollen as you can into the air, hoping that a few will land in the right place. Wind pollination works okay in open areas where there are not that many different plant species putting out their own pollen. But it really doesn't work that well in habitats that are enclosed or diverse, like a tropical rainforest or a meadow of flowers. We call flowering plants angiosperms, and boy, have angiosperms been successful. Their success is undoubtedly due to their ability to recruit the help of animal pollinators to move their pollen. So who are these important animal pollinators? Well, a pollinator is any animal that moves pollen successfully from plant to plant. What animals come to mind when you think of a pollinator? Probably bees. Yeah, they're important pollinators, but other insects, birds, and even mammals like bats are important pollinators too. The best pollinators are highly mobile. In fact, most of them fly. The more flowers that a pollinator can get to in a day, the more pollination can happen. For example, animals that are loyal to one type of flower are more likely to move the right kind of pollen to the right kind of flower. I call bees professional pollinators because they're the only pollinators that are actively collecting pollen from the flowers. Most other pollinators visit flowers for nectar, but bees are actively collecting pollen because for a bee, pollen is baby food. Just like you, young bees need protein to develop and grow, and for bees, pollen is the only source of protein they have. Have you ever noticed how cute bees are? Well, those fuzzy hairs that make them so cute are actually designed to pick up pollen. These hairs even gain an electrostatic charge as the bee's in flight, so when the bee gets close to the pollen, that pollen just blobs right onto the hair. Bees will groom the pollen off their hairs and store them in these specialized pollen baskets or comb-like structures called scopa. When those are full, they'll head back to their nest and feed their babies. Bee plants have brightly colored flowers like blue, yellow, and orange that bees can see clearly against a background of green foliage. Not only are bees amazing pollinators, they're the most common pollinators of our agricultural and wild plants. So if we lose bees, we lose a lot of our flowering plants too. But while bees are critically important, they're not the only pollinators. Everybody loves butterflies, and you've surely seen them visiting flowers. So yes, those butterflies are pollinating too. So what's different about a butterfly? Everybody knows the big, beautiful wings, but they also have really long tongues. So flowers that want to target butterflies hide their nectar deep inside long tubes where only the butterfly can reach the nectar. Because butterflies don't hover while feeding like a bird or a moth, butterflies visit flowers that provide a landing pad. Moths are close relatives of butterflies and they pollinate too. But did you know they're not active at the same time? Now, how can a moth-pollinated flower attract a pollinator in the dark? Moth-visited flowers are generally white. They also emit a strong, sweet odor that moths pick up from miles away with their keen sense of smell. Moths have really long tongues like butterflies, but hover when they feed on nectar. So moth-pollinated flowers tend to be shaped like a trumpet, with a deep tube hiding nectar from other insects. Did you know that bats are the major pollinators of bananas, mangoes, cacao, and guava? Like the moths, nocturnal bats prefer white flowers that are easier to locate in the dark. These flowers have a strong odor that helps the bats locate them in the dark, but to us humans, it's a bit unappealing. Because bats are mammals, they require a lot more energy than insects. Flowers that cater to bats need to produce much more sweet nectar than other flowers. Many birds around the world are nectivorous, and they make great pollinators. Birds have excellent eyesight and primarily use visual cues. They're especially attracted to red flowers that can provide them with enough nectar to fuel their large bodies and energetic flight. Hummingbirds are the ones that we're most familiar with. Like the other nectar feeders, most of them have very long beaks and tongues to reach the hidden nectar. Flies can be excellent pollinators too. Chocolate is pollinated by a tiny fly the size of a mosquito. But when you think of what flies like, what comes to mind? They like stinky stuff, like rotting flesh and dung. So now we have a clear idea of why plants need animal pollinators, but how do they get those animals to do their work? Animals visit flowers because the flower gives them something they want. Essentially, flowers offer bribes and rewards to those pollinators that do a good job of moving the pollen around. The most important and common rewards found in flowers are food in the form of sugary, rich nectar and protein-rich pollen. Flowers also offer fragrances. Animals have come to rely on these rewards as part of their diet. Now, it's not enough to have the rewards. Flowers have to advertise the rewards to attract pollinators. The great variety of colors we see in flowers is undoubtedly due to the different colors that animals are attracted to. Birds and butterflies love the color red. They're very attracted to it. But bees see red as black and so rarely visit a red plant. So flowers that attract night-flying pollinators, like moths and bats, are never red. Mostly they're white because that stands out best against the dark night sky. Flowers cater to the way different animals sense the world. If you were a pollinator, would you be more likely to look for a single flower or a whole patch of flowers? Of course, you'd go for the whole patch of flowers because you'd be more likely to find more flowers with nectar there. One trick that many plants use is to keep older flowers around to help attract pollinators from a distance. But they change colors after they've been pollinated. This color change is very common in flowers and acts to help speed up the process for pollinators. What other signals do you think flowers emit? That's right, flowers give off odors. It turns out many insects like bees and butterflies and moths really like sweet-smelling flowers. Flowers combine color and odors with sizes and shapes to reward only those animals that will pollinate them successfully. Sometimes the plant cheats and has false colors and shapes that pretend to provide rewards. In turn, some animals have figured out how to cheat the plants too and steal rewards without transferring pollen. A combination of floral cues that attracts a specific group of pollinators is called a pollination syndrome. This collection of traits exists because different pollinators are attracted to different colors, shapes, and smells. Pollination biologists like me use these syndromes to begin to predict what pollinators visit a flower. So I hope that I've convinced you that pollination is incredibly important for our world and our food supply. Many plants need pollinators to reproduce successfully, and we need them for our healthy fruits and vegetables. Go check it out. You can be a pollination biologist too. Use what you know about how different pollinators perceive the world to start predicting who visits what flower.
And it's too bad that we are not at school, otherwise we'd be able to go for a field trip to my house where Mr. Vanderboom has 3 beehives, and we'd be able to watch the bees going around to the different flowers and see what kind of color flowers they like to go to and see them collecting pollen. But now we'll just have to imagine it. So let's keep going here. How do insects help plants grow? Plants need the help of insects, birds, and even wind to move pollen from one flower to the other to help them grow. Without the transfer of pollen, plants cannot produce fruit or seeds to continue their life cycle. The sticky pollen from flowering plants clings to the bodies of birds and insects as they land on flowers. While flying from plant to plant, pollen is dropped off or rubs off of the insect's body, transferring it from one flower to another. This process is called pollination. Plants must be pollinated to produce seeds that will continue the life cycle. Why do plants disperse their seeds? Dispersing seeds is a necessary part of continuing the plant life cycle. Seed dispersal is when seeds are transported from the plant to another area in order to grow. Plants disperse their seeds to ensure that the next generation of new plants have less competition for the space, sun, and water they need to grow. If plants simply let their seeds fall to the ground beneath them, the soil would be overcrowded with new plants. And it's just like we saw on the language arts video last week of the tiny seed. Those were the seeds being dispersed so that they could spread out. Plants depend on the help of insects, animals, wind, and water to help them move their seeds to new locations away from the parent plant. How do seeds travel? Plants have 5 primary ways they move their seeds. Unlike animals, plants are stationary and cannot move about to spread their seeds. To adapt, plants have developed other methods to move their seeds away from the parent plant, ensuring the continuation of the life cycle. Some plants simply let their seeds fall to the ground using gravity. This method is often used by annuals or plants that live only one season. Since the parent plant dies off, the new seed does not compete for space, sun, and water with the parent plant. Air. Plants such as dandelions and cattails, or maple seeds, we call them helicopters, have lightweight seeds that are easily blown by the wind. These seeds have feathery bristles that can be carried long distances. In the right conditions, these seeds can travel hundreds of miles. Trees such as maple and cottonwood have seeds with papery wings shaped like propellers to help them flutter through the air. Water. Many plants grow near rivers, lakes, streams, or oceans. These plants produce seeds that float. Their fruits and seeds are carried away by the water. Water lilies grow in ponds. As their seeds float in the water, they become waterlogged and fall to the bottom of the pond. Lodged in the mud, water lily seeds take root on the pond floor to sprout and colonize in a new location. Aren't those beautiful? I think water lilies are so pretty. Animals. Another way to send seeds away from the parent plant is with the help of animals. Seeds such as chestnuts and nettles have barbed tops that get tangled in an animal's fur or feathers. Other seeds have sticky coatings, ideal for attaching themselves to animals as they pass by. Nut trees allow their seeds to fall to the ground. These seeds are often carried away by squirrels, raccoons, and skunks far from the parent plant. Some of these seeds are eaten by the animals, but many are gathered, then forgotten about and left to grow in their new locations. Many animals eat the fruits of plants. The seeds of the fruit pass through the animal's digestive system unharmed and come out the other end in their droppings. African elephants eat the fruits that have fallen from trees and deposit the seeds in their droppings several miles away. Monkeys eat figs and other fruits. Even ants carry seeds into their nests where they can begin to grow underground. The seeds found in animal droppings eventually germinate and grow. Explosive force. One unusual adaptation is the ability that some plants have developed to launch their seeds. When the seed pod of the milkweed plant ripens, it bursts open with an explosive speed, flinging the seeds into the air. This is caused by tension building in the cells of the plant. When enough tension is created, the pod explodes. Other plants like peas and flax produce seed pods that when ripe dry out and split open, causing the seeds to scatter. So it's very much like a balloon that gets filled up with too much air and eventually pops and all of the air inside explodes out. And here, as the seeds are ripening, they're getting bigger and bigger and pressing more and more and more on the outside of the seed pod until it's too much pressure and all of a sudden it explodes and they all come blowing out. So now we have two worksheets to do. The first thing is, how do seeds travel? So you need to look at these different things. Remember the examples we just talked about, and you can see how you think these different ones would travel around. Are they blown around in the wind? Are they carried around, stuck to animals' fur? Or are they eaten by animals and then pooped out somewhere else? Or do they just fall to the ground with gravity? Or do they explode open? What do you think? Write one of those 4 words underneath each one, and then you can come back later and see the answer sheet. And the other worksheet that we're going to do is a cut and paste. You have cause and effect with bumblebees. So you'll have, I don't want to give you the answer sheet. You'll see that there's a page that has some different words on there. For example, I have to see if I can find it for a minute. I'm just going to go to one of the answers so you can see it. For example, it says, a bee lands on a flower, then flies off to another bloom, and you have to find the answer that goes with it. Pollen is spread from flower to flower. So on the left side, you will write down the cause, like the sun is shining really brightly, And then the effect might be that the plant is able to use the sunlight to create food. So you're going to cut and paste both of all of those. So we have two activities. This page here with how seeds travel, and then this cut and paste. So you need to pause the video now for a minute, do that work, then come back, and I'll have the two answer sheets for you. Okay, so you're done now. Here we can take a look at the answers. How do seeds travel? Well, the beans, they fall down to the ground, and then eventually the bean pods will dry up, they'll split open, and the seeds will fall out. A cattail is all little seeds very tightly together in that top brown piece, and they can come loose and blow away in the wind. And an interesting thing about cattail is that the whole entire plant, the roots and the stem and the leaves and even the furry seeds at top, they are all edible. So if you ever get lost in a swamp somewhere, you can always eat a cattail plant. It might not be very tasty, but you can eat it all. An apple, the seeds get spread by animals because they eat the fruit and then they walk around and they leave their poop dropping somewhere that has the seeds in it. A thistle actually spreads their seeds by explosion. So you've sometimes seen those purple thistles. You might remember them from Winnie the Pooh, and Eeyore always has thistles, and those explode. Chestnuts get carried around by animals by getting stuck to their fur and then dropped off somewhere else. An oak tree, those seeds get carried around by animals who take them and go and bury them or hide them somewhere to eat them later and then sometimes forget about them. Raspberries are also carried around by animals, and it can be a combination of two things. Raspberries, if you look carefully at them, you might remember that they actually have these little bits of almost prickly stems that are sticking out of them. So that can stick to the animal's fur, or they can be eaten by animals and the seeds pooped out somewhere else. Sunflower seeds are also spread around by animals from them eating them and pooping the seeds somewhere. Dandelions, of course, we know those spread with wind because we, I'm sure, have all had fun blowing on those. Poppy seeds are spread by gravity. After the flower falls off the top, then the plant will fall over and the tiny little black seeds fall out on the ground. Maple tree gets spread by wind, and milkweed is spread by explosion. And then on the cause and effect, on the cause side, yours might be in a different order, but the causes and effects should all match with each other. So you should have the cause, a bee lands on a flower, then flies off to another bloom, and the effect is pollen is spread from flower to flower. The cause, the sun is shining brightly. The effect is energy from the sun is used during photosynthesis. For the cause, it is raining outside. The effect is water is absorbed into the roots of plants. For the cause, a seed is given sunlight, water, and oil. The effect is a healthy plant grows. And for the cause, birds and other animals eat seeds and pass them out. The effect is seeds are spread to different areas. So that's it for today. If you get a chance to do the experiment with putting a plastic bag on some leaves, I would love to hear about it or to see pictures of it. Also, if you did have a chance to do the experiment we talked about last week with 4 different plants, I would love to hear about that also or see any pictures you have of it. All right, enjoy.